My name is Sebastian. I'm German-Italian. I'm a trained economist, studied in Cambridge and Harvard. And I spent around 10 years as a tech entrepreneur. I actually built companies in the UK, but with global reach for around 10 years, the biggest one to around 50, 60 people. And then in 2020, I was asked to join the German Chancellery, then Angela Merkel's office, to take care of EU affairs on behalf of the German government. So I transitioned my startup, I joined the government, it was an amazing time, got to work with Angela Merkel and her team. Then the government changed in Germany. I kept doing work for the World Bank, for governments through the World Bank. And around a year ago, I discovered carbon dioxide removal. And when I stumbled upon it, I knew that I had to drop everything and go for it. I had two choices, being an entrepreneur or working on policy. That's kind of what I've done historically. I saw a lot of great entrepreneurs already, and so I decided to focus on policy. And today I'm a policy advisor for Carbon Future, which is one of the leading platforms for high quality carbon removal. And I take care of US, EU and UN policy.
How did you come across carbon removal and what was your reaction?
So I was already looking, my background is in digitization, and I was looking to work on climate change because really I've been feeling the urge to do something about the biggest problem we face as humanity for a long time. So I was getting into climate tech because I love technology, and I stumbled upon the podcast by Naeem Merchant, The Carbon Curve, which is on carbon dioxide removal. And we used to work together in another sector, so I was quite curious what he was doing. And when I first heard about carbon dioxide removal, it made sense. And I was like, this is the most sensible thing I've heard in a long time. I asked a few folks if they knew about it, they didn't, and that's when I knew I had some advocacy work cut out for me.
Can you give us a kind of a big picture overview of where you see we are at the moment?
I mean, just recently the latest IPCC report came out, and I mean there were no big surprises in the sense that it was the sixth report, and since 2018 it's been pretty clear what needs to be done to stay within 1.5 degrees or even 2 degrees of global warming. And frankly, if we look at the national determined contributions, basically what governments are currently saying that they're going to do versus where we need to go, there's just this massive gap. And that's both emissions reductions and that's carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere. And when we think about climate restoration, we need to get to net zero first. And often we hear this number of 10 gigatons of CO2 removal that's needed. In reality, it's probably going to be more like 13 or 15. And I think people just need to appreciate that is so incredibly much carbon removal that needs to be done. And that's even to get to net zero. So if we want to get to climate restoration, pre-industrial levels, we're not talking about 13, 15, we're talking about a multiplier of that. And so we have a lot of work to do.
What are your views on that? And if you could answer as a statement, are you optimistic that can ever be achieved?
I think it will be achieved. Because we don't have a choice as humanity. My question is just if by the time we really get going, we will already have passed points of no return. So for me, it's not a question of if, I think we're going to make it. The question is with what consequences we're going to make it.
Can you talk about some of the peripheral things of that, governance and innovation and stuff, and people wanting to just race ahead because the policy people are just taking too long to do things. The dangers as well as the benefits.
So I think we've got a lot going for us already. If we look at the positive side, investment into clean tech and carbon dioxide removal is increasing massively, even amidst an incoming recession. Clean tech has received 70 billion in investment last year, up 90%. Those are amazing growth rates. We see talent pouring into the sector, right, left, and center, just like myself, from all sectors, especially now big tech with the layoffs. A lot of people are coming into clean tech. And we're seeing sentiments changing. We're seeing more awareness, we're seeing more urgency, so that's all very positive. But if we look on the other side, at the moment, we need to remove between 10 gigatons, maybe 15 gigatons yearly by 2050. At the moment, we're at 2 gigatons. And of that, only 0.1% or 2 megatons are actually industrial, high-quality carbon removal. So we're really far behind. I do believe that we need to find a lot of different avenues to change that, and the one that I believe will have the biggest impact is policy.
Can we just talk about the presentation that you made on creative accounting and carbon credits?
Yeah, I mean, the carbon dioxide removal industry is very nascent, and as such, we just have to accept that we're going to make a lot of mistakes and there's going to be a lot of failures. And what I saw with the whole, Guardian investigation was a lot of defensive behaviors by a lot of folks in the carbon dioxide removal industry. And instead, where I think we need to go, we need to appreciate that there's going to be a lot of failures, and we should welcome the scrutiny and accountability brought by journalism, brought by civil society, and collaborate instead of criticize and attack. Because if we think of one example, take what's called an open loop CDR system. You have things like that you can't really control for as well as you would like. When you're working with nature, when you're working with trees, when you're working with soil, you're trying to measure as much as you can, but often you don't have 100% certainty. So things are going to go wrong. And I think journalism in particular has a really important role to play in calling that out. And we have to be honest as an industry. We have to own that, we have to step up to that, and we need to learn from that. And so that's the direction that I think we need to go.
Can you talk about the relationship between a growth economy and carbon removal, how those can kind of work together, if they can work together?
Yeah, I guess that I'm quite pragmatic when it comes to this. We live in a capitalist society and economy, for good and for worse. And we need to work within that. I simply don't believe, we've tried, but I don't believe that we can tackle the climate crisis unless some people can make money of it. As much as I would like it to be different, that's how I see it. And so I think we need to create economic incentives, both through, compliance requirements, but also through things like tax incentives and subsidies to make sure that the economy as a whole and the big players in the economy move in the direction that benefits the climate and not the other way around.
Okay. And just commenting, because this isn't going to work if it's just down to public money, right?
It can't just be public money. If anything, if we look today, it's mainly private money. So the majority of money that's going into climate restoration, especially carbon dioxide removal, is private money through, for example, the voluntary carbon market. That is a drop in the ocean of what governments and public procurement could do. And so one thing that I'm really excited about in the next couple of years and decades, which we're seeing the early stages of, is the public procurement, government procurement of, for example, carbon dioxide removal.
I don't think we asked to talk to you about this, but what are your thoughts on methane credits?
Methane is one of the, if not the most problematic greenhouse gas that we are facing at the moment. And methane emissions are huge at present. And it's often underappreciated and underreported. And I do think that having credits, having financial incentives for companies to deal with methane reduction and removal will be incredibly important. I'm 32 years old. I plan to live another 50, 60, God knows, maybe 70 years on this planet. I hope to have children. And like many people of my generation, I'm very worried about what that actually means in practice. What happens if we cross a couple of these tipping points? What does that mean for my children and for myself as well? And I think with that comes the unavoidable conclusion that we have to work on climate change and give it everything we can. Donating $50 once a month will not cut it. We have to devote our time and energy to it. And so that's at least the conclusion for me. I'm trying to convince as many people as I can to join the fight because, we don't really have another choice. If we want to remove 10, 12, 15 gigatons a year by 2050, we need all hands on deck. We need all solutions that we can. But we should also be strategic. We should think about what technologies are going to yield that removal at what point in time in the next 25, 30 years. And so if you think about nature-based solutions like afforestation and soil carbon, we can do that at scale today. So we should put our weight behind it as much as we can. If we think about what's currently probably most talked about, because it's very easy to explain and it's sexy in policy circles, direct air capture, that has a ton of potential to become maybe even the leading removal methods, who knows, 2035, 2040 onwards. But it will take a while for that industry to take off. We're talking about very small amounts in the grand scheme of things in the next 5 to 10 years. So what I'm missing from this discussion is, how do we fill that gap? what are the intermediate carbon removal solutions that can actually yield megatons, potentially gigatons of removal. And there, frankly, I am looking at biomass-based removals. There's a ton of waste biomass lying around the US, Europe, everywhere in the world. And through things like pyrolysis, we can turn it into biochar, for example, which stores carbon away permanently and has a lot of advantages in agriculture. So what I'd like to see more is focus on a portfolio approach, not picking winners like has happened in some places, because it's too early to pick winners, and putting money behind approaches that are going to yield that carbon removal in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. Ocean carbon removal or ocean CDR has so much potential. When you think about scale, when you think about cost competitiveness, when you think about where you can do it in the world, it's an amazing technology, set of technologies, I should say, that we should fully get behind. Where it gets a lot of heat is around concerns around geoengineering. And these concerns around geoengineering are something that we're very sensitive about, especially when it comes to oceans. But frankly, we are doing geoengineering every day by emitting gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere. And what we're talking about here with the oceans is something that, of course, needs to be monitored, needs to be controlled. But I'm seeing a lot of great efforts being nipped in the bud, being stopped in the starting lines with geoengineering concerns, which are for me a bit out of place and at times a bit hypocritical as well. We're simply running out of time. We need to get these solutions up and running as fast as we can. The longer we wait, the more radical the measures will have to be, and the less we have a chance of making it. And so at this point in time, we should not be curtailing efforts with concerns that are at times, of dogmatic root. And instead, we should just throw our weight behind all CDR methodologies and try to get them to scale as fast as we can.
Can you give us a bit of a 101 on carbon credits?
Yeah, I mean, carbon credits are essentially a tool that we're using to channel money into carbon dioxide removal, into clean tech more broadly. The way that it works is there are two markets. You have the voluntary credit market and you have the compliance credit market. The voluntary credit market is where companies buy credits purely because they want to offset their emissions, they want to make a statement, they want to use it for marketing purposes. There are many reasons that people buy these credits. On the compliance side, companies are actually forced to buy them. So there are examples where, for example, oil and gas companies in Europe have to acquire allowances in this case, which are also kind of offsets, to balance some of the emissions that they would otherwise emit. Both of these are really important avenues because without these, we can't effectively put a value on CO2. So carbon credits are really a way to put a value on the emission, the reduction, and also the removal of carbon dioxide removal. And that is an incredibly powerful vehicle. And with time, we're going to see this market is supposed to scale into the trillions of dollars if we manage to actually fight climate change effectively. So it will be huge.
Really, should there be differentiation from a carbon credit value between CDR, direct air capture, and the various sectors of it? Should they have different values?
And this, one of the problems that we currently have in what is called the offset market is that we put a lot of different things into the same bucket, which are actually very, very different in terms of climate impact. If you think about allowances to emit, emission reductions, emission removals, they have a completely different value for the planet. And so in the public perception, however, a carbon credit is a carbon credit. And so if you're a company and you have 100,000 tons to offset, you're just going to go for the cheapest stuff because the public doesn't care if these were cheap $10 forestation credits or if these were $1,000 direct air capture credits. And that's a problem. The only way to differentiate currently is price. We do need to also differentiate between the quality of these. And that's a direction we're seeing, especially in Europe, is creating more differentiation in the quality of the credits. Well, the role of oil and gas is very, very controversial in climate restoration and carbon dioxide removal because, frankly, these are the companies that have led us a lot to the problem that we're facing today. However, they're also the companies that have the infrastructure, talent, capital to potentially do something about it. And so, while this is something that a lot of people won't agree with, my personal stance is we need to get this job done. And I don't really care who gets it done as long as we get it done. And that will mean that oil and gas companies will profit financially significantly from carbon dioxide removal if they do the job well. And we can see this, for example, through massive tax credits that are being rolled out in the US. But people who are saying we shouldn't let oil and gas take any part in this discussion and in this huge effort that we need to take, I think are shutting the door to one of the most important players that we need.